My daughter-in-law flung a glass pitcher of sweet tea across my Thanksgiving table and caught me on the left side of my head. The pitcher shattered against the wall behind me. Tea ran down my face and soaked into my good blouse. And my son, my only child, stood 6 feet away and said, "Mom, you brought this on yourself." I pressed my dinner napkin to my head and smiled at him. Then I picked up my car keys from the sideboard, walked out the front door, and drove myself to Mercy General. I called my attorney from the parking lot before I even turned off the engine. Phase 1 was complete. None of them knew, not my son, not his wife, not her parents who had driven up from Raleigh with 2 full suitcases and a sense of entitlement that could peel paint, that I had spent the last 8 months preparing for this exact moment. There were 3 cameras in my dining room. There was a digital recorder stitched into the lining of my cardigan pocket. And there were documents in a safe deposit box at First National Bank that would rearrange their entire understanding of reality before the week was out. They thought they were dealing with a soft-spoken widow who missed her husband and cried at hymns. They were not. My name is Irma. I'm 67 years old. And for 32 years, I worked as a senior examiner for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. That means I spent 3 decades walking into banks, credit unions, and financial institutions, sitting down across from the people who ran them and finding the lies. I was good at it, exceptionally good. When I retired, my supervisor told me I had the finest instinct for financial deception of anyone he'd worked with in 40 years. My husband, Edward, we were married 41 years, always used to say I could smell a lie before the person telling it had even finished thinking it up. He said it like a compliment. He meant it as one. Edward died 2 years ago, pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the last morning, I sat beside his hospital bed and held his hand while the light in his eyes went out. 11 weeks. That's not enough time for anything except learning how to exist in a world that's missing its center. We had built our life here in this old farmhouse in the Blue Ridge foothills of Virginia. Edward had planted every tree on this property. He had rebuilt the front porch boards one summer when our son was 12. And our son had sat on an overturned bucket and handed him nails and asked questions about everything the way children do. That was the boy I raised. That was the boy I thought I knew. My son called me on a Thursday evening in October, 7 weeks before Thanksgiving. His voice had that particular quality I'd heard before in people who are trying to sound casual while not being casual at all. Slightly too bright, slightly too quick. He said he and his wife were thinking about coming home for Thanksgiving this year, that her parents happened to be in the area that week anyway, and wouldn't it be nice to all be together? At my house. Of course, I said, this house is always open to family. After I hung up, I sat in Edward's old armchair, the leather one that still smells faintly of him if I press my face into the headrest when no one's watching, and I thought about what I already knew. I had known about my son's gambling for 9 months. A former colleague of mine had flagged a name associated with an unlicensed online betting operation out of Miami. My son's name. His debt had grown to just under $180,000 by the time I found out. He had borrowed against his salary, against what little savings he had, and finally against a line of credit his wife had opened in her own name without telling him. I had known about my daughter-in-law's situation for 7 months. Her employer, a regional property management company, had been quietly investigating internal discrepancies. Small transfers, irregular invoices, payments to vendors that didn't quite exist. My daughter-in-law handled accounts payable. The amounts were not small. None of this surprised me. From the first time my son brought her home, I had watched her eyes move across every room like she was cataloging what things were worth. I had known they were coming for the house for 5 months, ever since I had hired a private investigator to confirm what I had been feeling in my gut. He sent me a file that included a recorded conversation between my daughter-in-law and her father in a Raleigh restaurant where they discussed, in terms that made me set down my coffee cup very carefully, what the farmhouse would likely sell for on the current market, how to approach the question of having me declared incompetent, and which attorney might be willing to assist with a power of attorney obtained under conditions that were not entirely voluntary. I read that file 3 times. Then I called my attorney and told him to start building a wall. 6 weeks before Thanksgiving, I wired $180,000 through a blind trust account. The money was routed through 3 institutions before it reached a settlement company in Miami that handled my son's debt, anonymously, completely, without leaving a single fingerprint back to me. I gave my son a clean slate. I erased his single most terrifying problem. I handed him his life back, free and clear. And then I waited to see what he would do with it. What he did was call me 3 weeks later to ask if his wife's parents could stay in my guest rooms over Thanksgiving because hotels in the mountain area were expensive that time of year. He said it would mean so much to everyone to be together. I said, of course. I thought about Edward. I thought about what he would have done. Edward was a kinder person than I am, kinder and less strategic. He would have picked up the phone and said simply, "Son, I know you're in trouble. Let me help you." And our son would have taken the help and maybe changed, or maybe not. But at least Edward would have died, knowing he'd tried the gentle way first. But Edward was gone, and the gentle way had a time limit. They were already planning power of attorney documents over dinner plates in Raleigh. Gentle was not going to be enough. I had to know with certainty who my son had become. The only way to know that was to give him one final clear choice and watch what he chose. The week before Thanksgiving, I had the camera system tested. I confirmed the cloud server was uploading clean. I slipped the recorder into the lining pocket of my gray cardigan, the small digital one my attorney had given me years ago, which was a joke between us because, after 32 years examining fraud, my entire life was essentially one long exercise in documentation. I cooked for 3 days. I made Edward's cornbread dressing, the recipe his mother had written on an index card in 1974, the ink so faded, now I have to hold it under the lamp to read it. I baked 2 sweet potato pies. I brined the turkey overnight in the downstairs. Sink, the way Edward had taught me our first Thanksgiving in this house, when we were both too young to really know what we were doing, and we burned the rolls and laughed until we had tears running down our faces. I was ready. They arrived at noon. My son looked thinner. He wouldn't quite meet my eyes when I hugged him, and his arms around me were brief and formal in a way that cost me something I didn't show. My daughter-in-law kissed my cheek and handed me a bottle of wine, with the air of someone presenting a certificate of achievement. Then came her parents. Her father was a large man in a pressed shirt and new boots that hadn't been broken in yet. The kind of man who needs you to know he used to have money even if he doesn't anymore. Her mother was precisely the opposite. Thin, watchful, draped in silk she'd probably bought at a discount and was hoping I wouldn't recognize as such. They walked through my front door without being shown in and began immediately to evaluate. Her father knocked his knuckles against the hallway wall the way men do when they're thinking about load-bearing walls and renovation costs. Her mother picked up one of Edward's hand-carved duck decoys from the side table, turned it over to look at the bottom, and set it back down without a word. They hadn't said hello yet. We sat down to dinner. I had laid out Edward's good china, the blue willow pattern we'd bought at an estate sale in Charlottesville 20 years ago, and carried to the car wrapped in newspaper because we couldn't afford the box. My daughter-in-law held up a salad fork and examined it with the expression of someone at a pawn shop. Her mother said the dining room was charming, in a tone that meant old-fashioned and unlikely to photograph well. Her father told me my turkey was old-fashioned too, and said he preferred the fried kind. I said that was interesting and passed him the gravy. My son pushed his food around his plate. He had the gray, nauseated look of a man waiting for an accident that hasn't happened yet. The accident was scheduled for dessert. It was her mother who opened the subject, which I had expected. She folded her hands on the table and arranged her face into practiced concern. "Irma, this property is just magnificent," she said, "but I do worry about you up here alone. All this land, this big old house, it must be an awful lot to manage." I said I managed just fine. "A woman your age, though," her father said. He said the phrase the way someone says, unfortunately, before delivering news they are not actually sorry about. My daughter-in-law laid her hand over mine on the table. "We've all been so worried," she said. "Especially since Edward passed. You shouldn't have to carry all of this by yourself anymore." I looked at my son. He was staring at the centerpiece candle like it might tell him what to do. "Are you planning to ask me something?" I said. A pause. Her father cleared his throat. Her mother adjusted her napkin. My daughter-in-law looked at my son with the particular look of a person who has rehearsed this and is indicating it is now his turn. My son swallowed. He said, "Mom, we were thinking, since you have all this space, and since things have been a little difficult for Jolene's folks lately, just temporarily, just until they find their footing again, we thought they could stay here, in the guest rooms." I waited. I gave him the silence that he needed to fill. "We thought," he said again, and then stopped. He couldn't finish it. His wife could. "Permanently," she said. The warmth was gone from her voice, the way makeup comes off in rain. "It makes the most sense. My parents need stability, and frankly, you shouldn't be managing all of this alone anyway. Your finances, the property taxes, the upkeep on a place this size. You're 67, Irma. We can handle those things for you. We want to take care of you. Manage your finances," the exact language from that restaurant recording. I placed my fork very carefully on the edge of my plate. The small sound it made was the loudest thing in the room. "No," I said. The word landed and everything changed. My daughter-in-law's face went through 3 distinct phases in under 4 seconds. Disbelief, recalculation, fury. My son pushed back his chair and stood up so fast it scraped across Edward's refinished floor. Her father's jaw went hard. Her mother made a small, wounded sound that she had probably practiced. "No," my daughter-in-law said. "No," I confirmed. "Your parents are not moving in here. You are not managing my finances. I'd like all of you to leave before dark so you have good light for the mountain road home." "You're being selfish," my son said. His voice cracked on the word. "They have nowhere to go. We need this. Why do you always have to make everything so hard?" Selfish, that word applied to me. The woman who had filed 32 years of federal service. The woman who had quietly paid off $180,000 of his gambling debt 6 weeks ago and never said a single word about it, not one word, because I wanted to see what kind of man he would be on the other side of a miracle. I opened my mouth. My daughter-in-law already had the pitcher in her hand. I saw it. I saw her arm pull back. I saw the weight of it, full of ice and sweet tea, and I made a choice I had made many times before in 32 years of building airtight cases. I held still. I did not move. I needed this to be unambiguous. I needed the cameras to capture something that no attorney, however expensive, could argue was a fall. The pitcher hit me flush on the left side of my head. The glass didn't shatter against me. It shattered against the wall behind me, 3 feet past where I was sitting, and the base connected solidly with my skull. Tea flooded down my neck and into my collar. I felt the warm, immediate arrival of blood above my ear, and I heard the room go completely, absolutely silent. I sat very still. I did not put my hands up. I did not cry out. I looked at my daughter-in-law, who stood there with her arm still raised and her mouth open, and the expression of someone who has just understood that they have made the worst mistake of their adult life. My son had his hands pressed over his mouth. He said nothing. He did nothing. He stood against the far wall and watched his mother bleed and made no sound at all. I reached into my cardigan pocket and found my dinner napkin. I pressed it to my head. I watched the fabric go dark, and then I looked directly at my daughter-in-law and I smiled. Not a large smile, just a slight lift at the corners, the particular expression I had learned to produce in 32 years of watching people realize they had incriminated themselves past the point of recovery. "Thank you," I said quietly. "This is exactly what I needed." None of them understood what I meant. I stood up, picked my car keys off the sideboard, and walked out my front door. Mercy General's emergency entrance was calm for a holiday evening. I walked through the automatic doors and gave the intake nurse my name and a precise, sequential account of the assault. The name of the person who had struck me, the object used, the approximate time, the witnesses present, and I asked that forensic documentation be completed before any treatment began. She looked at me for a moment. Then she picked up the phone and called security and the attending physician simultaneously. The photographs took 11 minutes. The doctor, young, efficient, with the quick and careful hands of someone who had done this before, cleaned the wound, shaved a small patch above my ear, and placed 4 staples with a precision I genuinely appreciated. I asked her to note in my chart that the wound was consistent with blunt force impact from a heavy glass object, and to photograph my clothing for the T saturation pattern. She did. She understood. I paid the bill in full in cash from the emergency fund I keep sewn into a money belt I have worn under my clothes every day since I was 34 years old and worked my first wire fraud case. I asked for an itemized receipt and placed it in the manila folder I keep in my car for exactly this kind of moment. Exhibit A was complete. My attorney met me in the hospital consultation room. He looked at the staples in my head with an expression he usually reserves for audit findings. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm perfect," I said. We gave the police my statement together. I was precise and sequential and did not embellish. When the detective asked whether I wanted to press charges, I let my hands shake. I said I couldn't do that to my son's family. I said I was afraid. I said I had nowhere to go if they removed me from my own property. I played the part completely. The frightened, dependent, elderly woman, the very role my daughter-in-law had been trying to force on me for the better part of a year. The detective looked frustrated and sympathetic. He handed me a pamphlet about domestic violence resources and told me the offer to press charges stood whenever I was ready. My attorney announced I would be staying at his guest house and would not be returning to my property that night. The door closed behind the officers. I stopped shaking. I straightened my spine. "Call me the moment they go back inside," I said. The guest house had good Wi-Fi. I sat at the desk with my laptop and 4 camera feeds open until nearly 2 in the morning. I watched them go through everything. My son went through the downstairs study first. He tried the filing cabinet. I had locked it, but he knew where I used to keep the spare key, so I had moved it and replaced it with a key that opened nothing. He found the decoy folder I had left, labeled Financial Documents, Originals. Inside was 12 years of utility bills and a grocery list in Edward's handwriting from the summer before he got sick. Milk, bread, the good coffee, call Irma Ree, anniversary. My daughter-in-law's parents took the upstairs. I watched her mother open the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Edward's sweaters were inside, folded the way he'd like them, that I still couldn't bring myself to move because moving them felt like an admission I wasn't ready to make. She went through them with quick, dismissive hands. She dropped 3 of them on the floor and stepped over them. I looked away from the screen for a moment and breathed through my nose. Her father found the wall safe in the master closet. The decoy safe I had installed 8 months ago, with a combination that required no effort to crack, and contents selected with the care of someone who has spent a career thinking about what people expect to find. $300 in small bills, a broken watch, some old photograph prints I didn't need and had sacrificed intentionally. I watched him pull the door open. I watched his face cross from eagerness to confusion to the particular species of fury that belongs to people who have worked themselves up to something and found nothing waiting for them. "There's nothing here," he said. "She moved it," my daughter-in-law said from the doorway. For the first time all evening, she sounded uncertain. She knew we were coming. She didn't know anything, my son said. He said it like he was trying to convince himself. I picked up my phone and sent my attorney a single word: now. I was back in my own kitchen by 7 the next morning, standing in the doorway with a cup of coffee, and my attorney beside me when my son came down the stairs and found us there. The look on his face was the look of a man who has just understood the scope of what he has done. His wife appeared on the stairs behind him, her parents in the hallway. And, coming through the front door, I had deliberately left standing open. 2 deputies from the county sheriff's office and the detective who had taken my statement. "Good morning," I said. My attorney set his briefcase on the kitchen table. "My client invited all 4 of you to her home for a holiday meal," he said, in the voice he uses when juries are listening. "She did not invite you back after she left for medical treatment. She did not authorize access to her documents, her safe, or any of her personal property. The cameras in this home recorded everything that occurred during the 12 hours following her departure, and I have a full copy of that footage on a secure server ready to turn over to these officers right now." He paused. "I also want to address the question of this property." He placed a document on the table, 40 pages, bound in navy blue, with gold-embossed lettering on the cover. "The Edward and Irma Memorial Agricultural Trust." "This house," I said, "has not legally belonged to me for 14 months. It belongs to the trust. You cannot inherit it. You cannot claim it through any legal instrument, petition, or proceeding. The secondary beneficiaries after my death are the Valley Women's Resource Center and the Blue Ridge Agricultural Preservation Fund." I looked at my son. "Your father chose those himself. We sat at this table together and he chose them." My daughter-in-law's face went the color of old chalk. "You can't," she said. "She already did," my attorney said pleasantly. "My daughter-in-law was arrested first. The assault was documented from 3 angles in high resolution. Her parents were arrested when the deputy found Edward's hand-tied fishing lures. Irreplaceable, 40 years old, mounted in a shadow box, inside her mother's coat pocket. My son was charged with unauthorized entry and with filing a false police report the prior evening, when he had called the non-emergency line to say I had injured myself in a fall. He didn't fight it. He stood in my kitchen with his wrists behind his back and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was 9 years old and had broken a window and didn't know what to do with what he'd done. "Mom," he said, "I didn't know you'd already paid it. The debt. I didn't know." I looked at him for a long time. "I know," I said. "That's the part that matters." He shook his head. "If I had known, I wouldn't have." "Then what?" I asked. "You would have come to me honestly?" "You would have sat at this table and told me the truth about the gambling and about what your wife had been planning." I kept my voice level. "It cost me more than it used to. I paid your debt and said nothing and gave you 6 weeks to show me who you were. And you spent those 6 weeks driving up here to take my home." He had no answer. There isn't one. At the threshold, my son looked back at me. "I love you, Mom," he said. "I know you do," I said, because I believe it was true. Love and character are not the same thing, and I had spent too many years confusing them. "I love you too. I will love you until I die. But love isn't enough to fix what you are right now. That part is yours to do. Only yours." The door closed. My attorney stayed for coffee. We sat at the kitchen table in the thin November light. And I looked at Edward's handwriting on the cornbread recipe card, still propped against the backsplash where I'd left it Wednesday. "You all right?" my attorney asked. "No," I said, "but I will be." That was the honest answer. Grief is not something you get through cleanly. You do not win a case and walk out whole. I had done what needed to be done. I had protected Edward's house and his land and the life we had built here together. I had given my son the clearest possible evidence of who he had become in a form that could not be revised or argued away. But I had also watched him leave in handcuffs on Thanksgiving morning, and that is a thing that lives in you somewhere quiet and permanent, regardless of what he deserved. 4 months later, I was deadheading the roses in the side garden when my phone rang. My attorney. My son had entered a plea deal, probation, mandatory counseling. His cooperation with the investigation into his wife's employer had opened a much larger case. She had been stealing for longer, and from more sources than anyone had initially understood. Her parents had been extradited to North Carolina on charges that predated everything that had happened at my dining table. My daughter-in-law was awaiting trial. My son was in therapy, twice a week. He had written me a letter, 4 pages, handwritten, the kind of letter that takes time because you are writing it to someone you have wronged so badly. You are not sure ordinary language is adequate. He didn't ask me to respond. He didn't ask for anything at all. He only wanted me to know what he understood now, about himself, about what he had allowed, about the man he was trying to become. I read it 3 times. I put it in the drawer of Edward's desk next to his reading glasses, which I still haven't moved. Maybe someday I'll write back. I don't know yet. You can love someone and still not know whether you can find your way back to them. That is a true thing that no one tells you going in, and it doesn't become less true just because the ending goes the way it was supposed to. There are still mornings when I stand at the kitchen window and the light comes through the apple trees the way it always has. At the particular angle it gets in winter. And for just a moment the house sounds the same as it did when Edward was in it. His boots on the porch, his voice calling something up from the garden that I was always just barely too far away to hear clearly. I press my hand flat against the cold glass. This is what we built, I think. This is what we protected. The Blue Ridge sits enormous and quiet past the tree line. Edward's trees are still standing. His roses will come back in April, the same as every year before this one, and I will be here to tend them. That is enough. That is in fact everything.